Morning. We're going to go ahead and do section 9.5. This is the last section in chapter 9. We're just going to kind of go over it. There's a few new things that we're going to be adding to it, but not too new. So anyway, let's go ahead and start looking at it right quick, and then you're going to do your worksheet. Okay, so because grouping numbers is helpful, especially as equations get more and more in depth, we need to take one more lesson to look at applying the distributive property to help us deal with parentheses containing unknowns. Specifically, we're going to take a look at situations involving negative numbers. Once again, we'll be applying what we already know to help us in new situations. Okay, so this is parentheses preceded by a negative number. Okay, this is the distributive property with negative numbers. So in order to properly distribute the multiplication when the multiplier is preceded by a negative sign, view the multiplier as a negative number. Okay, here we have 5 minus 2 times 3 plus 4. Okay, so if you added it first, obviously you do what's in parentheses first, we'll come up with negative 9. With distribution, okay, you're going to take the number that's right here beside it. Negative 2 times 3 gives you negative 6. Okay, a negative times a positive gives you a negative. Plus negative 2 times 4, which gives you negative 8. So you are left with 5 plus negative 6 plus negative 8, which equals negative 9. Okay, view the multiplier, the number in front of this, by a negative sign as a negative number. So it does look like, and it is 5 minus 2. Just think of it as this. 5 plus negative 2. Because remember, 5 minus 2 is the same as 5 plus negative 2. Okay, it's the same as adding a negative number. So always think of it like that. So, for example, let's see, the expression 5 minus 2 times 3 plus 4 means to subtract 2 times the total inside the parentheses from 5. If we don't distribute the negative sign, we'll end up with only subtracting part of the total. That gives us an incorrect answer. All right, so this gives you the don't do this. This is incorrect to say 5 minus 2, because then this looks like it's a positive 2, but it's not, because your original problem was 5 minus 2, which means 5 plus negative 2. Okay, so train yourself to look at subtraction as the addition of negative numbers. Okay, now let's apply the distributive property to unknowns. Say someone earned $200. They bought 2 DVDs at $14 each plus 2 shirts, and the price of which he can't remember. He now has $100 left of the money he earned. How much did he spend on each shirt? So let's write it out. So $200 is what he had in his pocket, minus 2 DVDs at $14 each, minus 2 shirts of which he can't remember the price, and now he has $100 left. Or 200 minus 2 and 14 plus whatever he spent on the shirts, because in parentheses is what he bought, and he bought 2 of those, and that's why you could do it this way. Now, in this equation on the left, this one here, we're subtracting the cost of the 2 DVDs and then the 2 shirts separately. In the equation on the right, we're adding the cost of each DVD and shirt together, multiplying it by 2, and then subtracting that product from $200. Both are just different ways of approaching the same problem. Both of those would be correct. So let's take a closer look at how to do this problem right here, as you need to know how to handle problems written this way. Now, there is an unknown inside the parentheses, so we can't simply complete the addition and then multiply. You can, however, distribute the multiplication, because this is right here. But we're going to think of this as $200 plus negative 2. Always look at a subtraction problem as a plus that negative number. So now, $200 plus negative 2 times 14 plus negative 2 times x gives you 100. Notice that we are now subtracting the cost of the DVDs and the shirts separately rather than adding them together first. In other words, we arrived at this other approach, the same problem that we mentioned up front in the in the first one. So $200 plus the negative 28 plus the negative 2x equals 100, and then you just work the problem from there, and you come up with x equals 36. So the main thing is just remember, when you've got a subtraction problem, think of it as addition of a negative number, or you will come up with a very wrong answer, because this could not be 2 times 14. This would be negative 2 times 14. Make sure you get that right. That way you have the right signs, the correct signs in front of your numbers. All right, let's look at this one. So each shirt was 36. So plug it all back in there, work it out, and make sure it comes out evenly. Now, let's look. That was distributive property using a negative sign in front of it. Now let's do parentheses preceded by a negative sign. Sometimes all we may have in front of a set of parentheses is a negative sign, like this here. For example, suppose we knew that a game of bowling was $2 in shoe rental, but we couldn't remember the cost per game. We knew we'd started with $8 in our wallet, ended up with $3 after renting the shoes and playing one game of bowling, so we'd have this problem right here. Notice that we use parentheses to group the total cost of the shoe rental and the cost per game, which we didn't know what it was, so we said X. We want to subtract that total cost from $8, because 8 minus the total we spent would equal the $3 left in our wallet. But how can we solve this since we don't know the cost per game? We'll take a look. Okay, so here we have 8. As we've seen, multiplying by 1 doesn't change the value of a number, the identity property of multiplication. So let's multiply the values inside the parentheses by 1. Remember how we were doing this before. Be the same as saying 8 minus 1 times $2 plus 1 and x. But we have an equation that we don't know how to solve. We can distribute the negative 1, because remember, we think of this as adding a negative 1. So it's 8 plus negative 1 times 2 plus negative 1 times x equals 3. Then you solve the problem using this, a negative, and this, a negative. Don't forget your signs in there. If you forget your signs, you'll get everything wrong. This is just finishing the problem. I'm not going to go through it. I think you know how to do this by now. Now, distributing multiplication between add-ins, including distributing a negative sign, preserves the intended meaning. Both $8 minus blah, 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 blah mean to subtract a total of $5 from 8. When we have an unknown inside the parentheses, distributing the multiplication can help us solve what we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. Now let's look at the gray box. These are always the important boxes. When a set of parentheses is preceded by a negative sign, such as this, distribute the negative sign by multiplying the values inside the parentheses by 1 and distributing negative 1. So this would be the same as saying negative 1 times 2 plus negative 1 times x. There you are. Now, understand that you can multiply any quantity by 1 without changing its value. That's the identity property of multiplication. That's crucial. In fact, it can be helpful to think of there being an understood 1 next to every unknown or parentheses, and that's true. So, beside every variable, just think of there being a 1. If there's a negative sign in front of it, then it's a negative 1. Okay? However you think of it, you can just multiply by 1 without changing the value. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, here's our worksheet. So it's divided into 3 sections from what I'm seeing. Number 1, A, B, and C. These are order of operations. Make sure you read the example meaning. So these should be pretty easy for you. Okay, on number 2, it says go back and resolve problems 1A through 1C. Using the distributive property, and then show your work. Here it gives you an example, and then gives you all the places to work. And since you do have room here, it would be nice to see some of the work here just to make sure you're doing it right. So you're going to go back up here and use these, do these as the distributive property. And then on the back, you're finding unknowns. A through, okay, E. So, make sure, like I said, make sure you read the example meanings. And there isn't a chapter synopsis or chapter review, so I think I'll use this as that. Now, if it ends up that you didn't do well on it or whatever, and I see that you didn't understand it, then we won't take the grade. But for the most part, I think you'll do pretty well on this, and we should take a grade on it. And so the next lesson, the next 2 lessons, there won't be a video. The next lesson will just be kind of a study day. Make sure you read section 9.6 on page 176 in your book. Just read over it. Go back over some of your worksheets and stuff. If there's something you don't understand and I've not graded your papers yet, send me a message. And then the day after that, you can take your quiz. And then we'll start chapter 10. Okay? That's all for today.
Yes!